Maricopa is just a wonderful place. It really grows on you. Everything's brand new, and there's pros and cons to that, I think. We love our history. We love where we've come from, but we were all farmland 15 years ago. And so, everything has come out of the ground. It's brand new, and that's really appealing to people. And I think probably one of my most favorite things about it is that, there's not a lot of that history of, well, this is the way it's always been done, and so it has to continue to be that way. We're very much about saying, well, this is our problem. How do we get outside of it? How do we fix it? How do we change it and think bigger than that? And so we say this is the issue, and let's just attack it, and we go for it. And so I think that's something that's very appealing to me and my personality, as well as to the city as a whole. And so, I come from a background. I grew up in Tucson. Went to school in Flagstaff. Went to law school out in Houston. Came back here. Became a financial advisor. Who knew? But I did that, and again, I worked at the Arizona State House of Representatives as a legislative analyst, and so it's interesting now that I find myself back in a position in which I end up doing a lot of legislation. You talked about bringing the Pinal County representatives here to speak, and I know those folks very well, so if I can help with introductions, I'm more than happy to. But certainly dealing with the legislature is an ongoing battle. We always joke that when they're not in session, that's when there's no damage being done to us, so that's a good thing. But it's an interesting game, and at the end of the day, it's how you play it that wins, and so it's important that we all play the game a little bit.
So you mentioned you were in private business, owned your own business. You also were the analyst for the State House of Representatives. So how did those two jobs influence how you look at your current job and your vision of the city, how you work for the city?
I think that's a great question. I think it's absolutely critical. We always talk about how government should be run more like a private business, and there's a lot of aspects of it that can be and should be, but there's a lot of aspects that it cannot be. And I think that coming from the private sector and then working in government, you are able to see, if you're open-minded about it, you're able to see how you can make that changeover and where you're limited. You see, government really does have a role. It has a role to play in public safety when it comes to permitting things. But it's like anything, you can take it too far. You guys are all real estate agents. In Maricopa, it was built on the backbone of HOAs, right? That's how most builders build nowadays. They go out and buy 5,000 acres or 2,000 acres, and they shove as many homes as they possibly can on that, because it's a formula that is proven to make money. And so when you look at it from a fiscal standpoint, it makes sense. But at the same time, there comes some challenges with that. And you're living 5 inches from your neighbor. And so I think that understanding that government has a role to play where it has to balance out. I was an HOA president for 8 years, and I always am probably quoted for good or for bad saying I hate HOAs, but the reason is that I learned that if I was going to help people, I needed to learn the ins and outs of it, and I needed to know how the government of an HOA worked so that I could help people understand what they were getting themselves into, and B, once they were into it, how do they navigate it. And so I think that taking that and applying it to the government sector now as a mayor, having a financial background, having a legislative background, having a business background, now adds all that to it, so I can see it from a government perspective of where it's supposed to operate from and when it goes too far. And I think that, again, as an HOA president, I saw that all the time. People would come in and say, I want you to do this. And, it's some outrageous something or other. Kill all the mosquitoes. And I'm like, I'm not God. I can't kill all the mosquitoes. I don't have that authority or power. But at the same time, there are things we can do. And so, it's understanding where the limits are and then understanding what we can do and being able to have that discussion. I think the other side of that is also an education. Anytime you can talk with people and say, okay, look, here's where our parameters lie. Here's the legal ramifications. Here's where we, have to deal with personal responsibility. And here's how we have to maintain a fiscal responsibility. And, managing all of these parameters gives us that ability to define the box. And I always say, if you want to think outside the box, you have to define it first. So if you define that box and you know where it is, then you can think outside of it, and then you can say, okay, this is a bridge too far, or this is, maybe we can step up and do more here in this area. So I think having these backgrounds and these preparations, if you will, I think hopefully lead me to be a better official in my time as a mayor.
Great. So let's take a big overview of Maricopa. Where do you see your city in 5 to 10 years? And then after that, where do you see your city in 50 years?
Wow, that's a good question. So if I have my way about things, I'm a very pro-growth individual. I believe that the rising tide raises all ships. And so as such, I think that the city of Maricopa is just destined for growth. It has its challenges, like all cities do. And, it's kind of a cat got your tail, or catch-22, a dog running and chasing its own tail in a circle. That's the way government has to be sometimes, in the fact that as you grow, you have all these new challenges, so you work to solve those challenges. And as you do that, you grow and you have to work to solve those challenges. And it's just kind of an ever-responsive yet trying to be proactive mentality of how do you accomplish both things. So I see Maricopa, I recently, just to give you kind of a glimpse into what you're talking about, Maricopa in 2008 or 2009 had a Wall Street Journal article published about it. And it was titled Paradise Lost. And it's so interesting because a Wall Street Journal reporter came out, was talking to our previous mayor, who's now a County Board of Supervisors member here in Pinal County. And at that time, they were talking about all the things that they envisioned for the future. And at the same time that we were in the middle of the recession, one of the worst recessions we had ever seen. Especially to those of you in the real estate industry, you know exactly what I'm talking about, that it was a housing crisis. And for Maricopa, that's what we were built as. We were built as a suburb, right? Here was this little piece of land out beyond Gila River that could offer something great. We were in a drive till you qualify kind of mentality at the time, and it really provided something for folks that were looking to buy a house. And so when that's all you have, then when the recession that happens is all based on real estate, you're going to get disproportionately hurt. And it was really kind of a sad article. I was actually quoted in it because I was an HOA president at the time. And, it was a sad outlook. And yet, here it is to go back and look at that in 2018 to 2008 and say, oh my gosh, look at all these things that actually did happen despite the recession. Because people didn't give up. And because we didn't give up, we attacked those challenges and we kept working towards them. And look at all those things that we talked about wanting to have, we now have. So to answer your question, where do I see us in 5 years, in 10 years, and in 50 years? I see that we're going to continue to explode in our population. I think we're going to continue to attract a diverse economy. That's something we've been working really hard at. We don't want to just be a suburb. We want to be a city where you can live, work, and play. And I think that when you look at the quality of life of the city of Maricopa, what you have is a really high standard of quality of life. We have amenities coming in left and right. We have people seeing that there's an opportunity there that they had never seen before. In fact, I'll diverge for just a moment and tell you a little story. So one of the areas, if you've been to Maricopa lately, you've seen our Copper Sky Recreational Sports Complex. And I think it's beautiful. I think it's a gem of the city. It sits just about, 100 yards away from, across the street from Harazak Chin's Casino and Ultrastar Multitainment Complex, which is also a gem. And between their marketing efforts and ours, it's really just kind of standing up as the place to be and a place that you want to see. Well, when the council purchased that land, there was a lot of challenges to it. It was in the floodplain. You have to go through, in post-Katrina world, Hurricane Katrina. You have to do a lot of different things with FEMA to eliminate floodplains and other things. And so it was a real challenge. And yet the voters of Maricopa said, we want to pay for this facility because we want it so bad. And they voted to do it in 2008. Okay, and they said, we're going to pay a secondary property tax because we want this so bad. And we're going to do it in the height of the worst recession since the Great Depression. That says something. So furthermore, the council decided to set aside 18 acres of commercial frontage property right there along the 347 in that particular area for the eventual construction of what would be a viable commercial, facility that goes along with the park and the recreational sports complex. And yet it's taken several years for it to happen and to things to be primed. But once we got the overpass done and got it funded, suddenly that land became incredibly valuable. And suddenly people started coming out of the woodworks. And so the story I'm going to tell you is about the owner of Shea Properties, right? Shea Commercial, Shea Homes. And this gentleman has been in commercial real estate for some 35 years. And he owned the piece that is, if you know the area, you come up Maricopa Casa Grande Highway from here, you get to Walmart, right? And that big piece of property there next to Walmart was originally slated for a variety of things prior to the Great Recession. And he owned it. And it sat in the bottom of their portfolio, and as we used to go to them and talk with them and try and get them to encourage them to market it and sell it with us, right? They just wanted nothing to do with it. In fact, so we finally took a buyer to them and said, hey, this guy's interested in buying your property. Would you mind doing it? And they said, yeah, no problem. He washed his hands and said, I'm basically done with Maricopa. And, that's a kind of a sad state of affairs, right? Well, turns out that the company that we contracted with to do our development of what we call Copper Sky Commercial, called CPI. And CPI ended up tapping their networks and their resources and brought in a variety of different people, including investors from New York. And the investors from New York came out and were planning to be here for about 3 or 4 hours and fly home. Okay, they came out, they saw the property, they saw the area, they were flabbergasted at what was going on there. So they turned around and they canceled their flight, and they stayed the entire day, and they stayed the night, and they talked with us, came back out the next day and toured the rest of the city and talked about the future plans, etc. And it was funny because they said, well, don't tell anybody else about this place. We're like, what do you mean? They're like, shh, no, we don't want anyone else in New York finding out about this. This is amazing. And I'm like, okay, whatever, this is great. We're happy you're saying that. Well, they then brought out this gentleman from Shea Properties, and Shea comes back out and he goes, he says, when I left Maricopa, I thought I was done. I thought I'd washed my hands. I didn't think I'd ever be back. He says, I've been doing this for 35 years. He says, what I see you guys have created, you've created a foundational premise of a quality of life. You have the amenities. You have a sense of place now that you didn't have when I left here 8-10 years ago. And he says, it's incredible. He says, I have money tied up in 3 other projects in the Phoenix metro area. He said, if I know, or if I had known then what I know now about Maricopa, he goes, I would take every dime out of every one of those projects and I'd put it solely into Maricopa. Because this is the opportunistic gem that people just don't know about yet in the Phoenix metro area. And so for us, that's a huge compliment and a huge exciting motion or movement or momentum forward that we hope to carry on. And so when I see the next 5 years, I see huge growth. When I see 10 years, I see more build out of industry and companies. When I see 50 years, I see a Maricopa that nobody even recognizes today, and that's exciting.
So speaking of that growth and new amenities coming in, can you give us an update on some of those new projects that some of them we may not even see yet,
Absolutely.
But they're coming?
It's true. Yeah, it's hard to talk about economic development because there's so many things everybody wants to know, and you can only say so much sometimes. But the reality is that we're working on a business park. We're working on seeding that ourselves. We've tried several times with public-private partnerships, and the problem is that certain developers come in and they want something to be done now, right? They want everything to be, so example, if you're trying to build a flex space, right? If you all know what a flex space is, right? And they want 10-year commitments from a bunch of folks that, are used to working out of their garage. Yeah. Well, that doesn't really work. People don't make that, I went from my garage to a 10-year commitment into, 5,000 square foot of space. And so there's that stepping stone is really hard to fill because, developer wants this, but yet the people in Maricopa and the businesses have either had 347 frontage space or the garage. There hasn't been that intermediary step to go to. And so one of the things that we've learned as a government, especially in the city of Maricopa, is that while we don't believe that we should fill the role of the private sector, sometimes, and I had this explained to me by an economist who's very well known in the Phoenix metro area, Jim Rounds, if you know him, he said, and he sits on the board of the Goldwater Institute, and so they're very, all things hands-off government. But he explained this to them the other day, and I thought it was one of the best ways. He says, sometimes government plays a role of when you try and teach your kids to ride their bike, you have to be there right with them, and you hold that seat, and you get them going until they learn how to pedal, and when they get it, you let go, right? And that's the same premise of what we have to do in Maricopa, is if the private sector isn't going to do it, then sometimes we have to spur the private sector by creating the infrastructure around it so that when that moment is ready to let go of that seat and let the private sector run with it, it's ready. And I'll give you a few examples of that. First is Copper Sky. Okay, there was nothing south of the tracks except for Ak-Chen and Harrah's, but there was nothing south. And part of it was because, most real estate agents and others said, oh, don't buy south of the tracks, right? Or don't, because you have to deal with the train. Well, the solution to that was the overpass, but nobody believed we could get it done. And so we worked on it and we made sure we got it done. And the second that sucker was funded, you would be surprised what has suddenly happened to south of the tracks. It's no longer a north and south portion of the city, but it's one city because it's now connected. When you look at trying to get businesses off of the 347 and into other parts, I always equate the 347 to the Vegas Strip, right? Everybody wants to be on the Vegas Strip. Well, there's other things in Las Vegas other than the Strip, right? I mean, all you got to do is get off the main drag and you can see all kinds of great things. And it's the same premise, but how do you get those initial first ones to start? And so what happened is we built City Hall in the east section of town. And people are like, well, why would you build it out here in the middle of nowhere? Well, it's in the middle of nowhere now, but it's not going to be in the middle of nowhere tomorrow, okay? Because what we just created was we created a need for people to come this way. And as soon as you can pull traffic off the main drag, now you have a reason to build things around it. And so what it's created is created a new district of area of schools that now, because of the traffic that schools create, again, you are now creating a need for businesses to say, well, wait a second, look at the traffic counts. They're off the main drag, they're coming here. I stand to benefit if I build a business here. And so that's the same thing we're trying to do with our business park. So as I look at Copper Sky Commercial, I look at the business park, I look at the development area by Walmart. We are working on a hospital. We're working on a variety of large type amenities that will change the foundation of what Maricopa is, also with additional roadways. We are looking at partnerships from a tech park. So when I look at Chandler, I see Chandler as, they're built out. There's no place left for them to go. They can go vertical, but there's not a whole lot of places for them to grow, out. And so that leaves Maricopa as the next jumping off point. And so what I see reverse commuting, right? How nice is it if everyone is still commuting out of town from Maricopa, that people are now commuting into town on basically what is an open roadway coming the other way. And so, plus if folks from Maricopa are working in this new tech corridor, then what you have less people on 347 because you have more people staying and working there. So I really see huge projects coming, but it's always about the first. Who's going to be the first? And I'll give you a great example. So since I've been mayor for 6.5 years now, I have probably had 1,000 meetings with hotel developers. Okay, I talk with them all the time. And it's funny, people always said, oh, it's A, never going to happen, or B, when it does, it'll be another 100 years. And I said, that's not true. It will happen and it will be 100 years. It just takes the first person. Who's going to be first? And once that first one happens, you watch, mark my words, within 2 years, there'll be another one on its heels. And it's funny because I'll have hotel developers come in and they'll sit down with me and they'll say, well, what can you give me? That's the first thing. I can't give you that much because there's something called the gift clause in the Arizona Constitution. But, aside from that little bit, we can talk about other things. And yet the first thing out of their mouth is, well, what are the comps? Well, there's no comps in the air. There's no hotel. You'd be the first. I don't know how to tell you this. I can show you the studies. I can show you how this works, and I can show you the need. But until you're willing to take the financial risk, it's a risk-reward scenario. And so, sure enough, we finally have had a guy through our contacts with CPI and others, someone who's come along, seen the light, and has understood the value that is staring them in the face. And so, sure enough, I think actually in tonight's agenda for City Council meeting, we will be approving the sale of a piece of property for the Maricopa's very first hotel within the city limits. And sure enough, there's a second one right on its heels. And so it's fun to see when people finally get it, and they finally go, I see the bigger picture now. It makes sense to me. And, sometimes you have to be the first one to drop the seedlings to create the forest, but you give it a little bit of time and a forest will appear, I promise.
So as you talk about these new projects coming in and your vision for the growth, one of the things that all that depends on is infrastructure in place. So do you have fiber? Do you have water? Do you have roads? Or can you do that quickly? Do you have air? Do you have rail? So can you talk a little bit about that part of your planning?
Yes. So that's a really big topic, and let's start ticking them off here. So infrastructure, fiber. Fiber is not so Maricopa has, like all cities, has its challenges, okay? And you have to remember that Maricopa lies in Pinal County, which is really fun because everyone thinks we're in Maricopa County. And so I always get, complaints about somebody from back east and, in the days when Sheriff Joe was the sheriff, it was always, how can you let him be sheriff? And I'm like, first of all, let me explain how this works. He's elected. Second, he's in Maricopa County. I'm in Pinal County. I know I have the name Maricopa. I get it. And then I would always send him to Greg Stanton, Mayor of Phoenix, even though he couldn't do anything about it either because I just thought it was funny. So I don't know if he thought it was funny, but I did. So anyways, at the end of the day, infrastructure is a really big deal. But you got to remember, we lie between two Native American Indian reservations. And as such, that creates its own challenges, right? You have to deal with rights of way. You have to deal with all kinds of stuff. But I think that as we see ourselves as a new urban city or a new modern American century city, one of the things we have to deal with is we know that we've got to figure out ways to advance the tech. And yet tech is very expensive. Mm-hmm. Right, I mean, some of you have probably seen the proposed solar roads that help charge your electric vehicles as you drive over them that they're doing in Germany. I don't know if you know this now, but roads cost about $1 million a mile. Okay, and that was before the 40% increase of labor and materials this year alone. Okay, so $1 million a mile. If it's an ADOT road, it's about $4 million a mile. So you can do the math real fast that if you want to build a solar road, that thing's going to cost you about $50 million a mile. Well, there's not a lot of $50 million laying around in multiplicities of that chunk of change. There's a lot of need in the state. It's a very large state, and yet because of our tax structure, because of the way we work, and that's okay, it means we have to prioritize the priorities. And so we have to deal with things like fiber in a very creative way. We do a lot of grants. As we rebuild infrastructure for old roads or revamp an area, like we have a great plan to revamp our Heritage District, which is that downtown area with the rail and everything else. We look to establish it then. And so that way we don't have to go back and rip up roads and redo things. Also really focus on partnerships. So we like to partner with our cable companies, things like that, so that when we're doing this, we're working together with the natural gas lines, we're working together with the cable companies, the electric companies, anyone that we can work with, so that we can work together to accomplish this all at once. We GIS it, right? So you map it out, you know where things are, you do it together, and if you can do it all at once, then you save everyone a lot of money in the long run. When it comes to roads, roadways is something that I think that we always feel like we're behind in. There's always more roads that need to be paved, always more roads that need to be fixed. And it's just expensive to do. And so when you have a limited budget, again, you have to prioritize where you're getting the most bang for your buck. And so that's one of the things we focus on. When you're looking at roadways in and out of the city, well, again, challenges being you have a Native American community. You don't get to just bulldoze a road where you want it to go. It doesn't work that way. It's a sovereign nation. You have to work with them. You have to find things that are important to them. And so that's one of the things I've been working a really long time on, is working very closely with Governor Lewis of the Gila River Indian community. And we've also done with, you know, the Pinal County propositions. Of course, those are tied up in the court right now. But if those will come through, then that will offer Maricopa almost $100 million to build alternative roadways. $30 million for the extension or widening or fixes of 347. Then you look at the Val Vista corridor, which we call the East-West corridor, right, which comes down Maricopa Casa Grande Highway, goes up Val Vista, hits Pinal, so it goes below Gila River, but north of Casa Grande, and therefore adds a high-speed alternative, which really also accentuates that corridor for businesses. I mean, I used to talk with Mayor, obviously Mayor McFarland here in Casa Grande, but Bob Jackson, the previous mayor, about how do we incorporate this into a true business corridor? Because there are so many industrial businesses and other things that want to locate between these two cities because of the access to infrastructure and the access to the freeways, and primarily because of the workforce that's here. There is a highly educated workforce. And you guys as real estate agents, you see that. You know who's moving here. You know who's moving to Maricopa, and they all work in the Price Road corridor. They all work in that tech corridor. At one point, 5 years ago now, we did a Meet Intel event with the city of Maricopa, and we probably had 450 individuals show up. That's just at Intel. But you look at the other businesses in that Price Road corridor, they're in Chandler, and you've got who? ASML, you have PayPal, Amazon, you know, other entrepreneurial type stuff. And so, you know, with that, you're really creating a need for those businesses. If they locate into this area, they will be funded with the workforce that's needed. And so that's really, really important. And I think that, you know, people don't give enough benefit to Maricopa and Casa Grande in that, because again, most of our commuters go north or you know, into the Phoenix metro area. But the reality is that if they could stay and work here, we have a citizen attitude survey that shows that 85% of our workforce that goes north, if they could stay and work in Maricopa, would take a pay cut to do it. That says a lot for a highly educated workforce. So I just think that those are the numbers that when you're able to get a company to understand that, that's a big deal, and it shows a big population explosion, especially from a workforce perspective and a business perspective, as soon as someone understands that and is willing to take the financial risk to do it. Other things, let's see, water is another one. Water is a tricky subject in the state. If anyone who's moved from back east or other places, water probably never crossed your mind, but in a desert, it's a big deal. And you've all heard the phrase that, you know, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. That is so true in Arizona. And, you know, you've probably recently read about the drought contingency plan, things like that. Our water has been the most important resource in this state since before we were a state. I don't know if you know this, but the reason that we have Maricopa and Casa Grande and Phoenix proper is because of the CAP. That canal that runs across the surface water, because our options are twofold. We can either gather water as it melts from the snow and fills up the lakes and the reservoirs, or we can pump it from the ground. And pumping it from the ground, well, we have huge aquifers. They only last so long with an ever-increasing population. And it takes hundreds of years for it to percolate back down and refill. So if you're pumping it out faster than it's going down, then you got a problem. And so why the CAP was created is because before we were a state, this water, the territory knew, we got to have this. And I don't know if you know this, but it took 50 years, that's 50 years of this state working to get Congress to pass the Water Protection Acts and the CAP Groundwater Protection Act. That is one of the things that we rely on here in the state for our survival. And so we started working on this around 1900. We weren't incorporated as a state until 1914. Or excuse me, 1912, I apologize, the 14th of February, 1912. And, as such, it's a really big deal. And yet it still didn't get signed until the mid-'60s. And so, water for us is a really big deal. And as Lake Mead continues to drop, everybody's going to take a little bit of a hit. Pinal County's going to take a hit. We are a member of a 7-state compact, which means that we all have this agreement on who gets what percentage of water of the Colorado River. And, I don't know if you know this, but that river used to flow down into Mexico. Now when it gets to a portion of Mexico, it's completely dry. There's not a single drop that comes through. Every single drop is accounted for. And as Lake Mead continues to get lower and lower and lower, closer to the pipe, once it goes below that pipe, we have a big problem. Okay, and so the idea is once it reaches a certain point where there's a differential between the height of the pipe and the height of Lake Mead, then they put everybody on a drought contingency plan. And that says, look, we all have to conserve or we're all going to die. Okay, and that's not what anybody wants. I know it's a bit drastic. You get the idea, Anyways, it's a do or die point. And so the idea is that everybody's going to take a percentage. Now, Arizona, even though it was our genius idea to come up with this whole plan in the first place, we had a lot less votes in Congress when it was passed, and we still do. We're very much subservient to California in votes in Congress. And so as such, we are one of the lowest folks on the totem pole, so to speak, okay, in the drought contingency plan. So when you take Arizona and say, okay, Arizona's going to take this hit, there's a system of people that all take a hit along the way in Arizona. And Pinal County is one of the lowest on that totem pole. And so it's one of those things we have to be very careful of. I also think it's really important that we control our messaging. I received a phone call a year and a half ago from someone in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and they said, so I hear you have a drought and you're running out of water, and they were looking for the salacious article. Yeah. And I said, well, wait a second, we've done a great job here in Arizona banking water. We sock it away, we store it, we try not to use all of it, we conserve it, we do everything we can to protect it. Whereas California, they use their allocation every year and it's running down the street in waste, right? Because they have so much. Because they have a higher allocation than we do, because that's what it took for them to sign off on the plan in Congress. And so they're wasting it. And then they find themselves in some difficult times, and they realize, uh-oh, we're in trouble too. And uh-oh, Lake Mead feeds us as well, so we got a problem. And so at the end of the day, one of the things that's really important to understand is I think that we need to control our message about, we don't want the folks back east, and we don't want the nation to think that because we're in a drought that we are something that should be crumpled up and thrown away. But rather, we are still an amazing place for quality of life, for the ability to live. And because of the way that this state has managed water for the last 30 years, since the 1980 Groundwater Management Act in the state of Arizona, we have the ability to weather these storms, to weather these droughts, and to deal with it. And so when I look at the city of Maricopa, one of the things that I think is one of its biggest selling points is that we have roughly 20,000 homes and businesses. And of that, we have an allocation through our private water company. We have an allocation of 26,000 acre feet of water per year. And we actually use only about 7,500 acre feet of water with those 20,000 homes and businesses. So what that says to me is it says Maricopa is primed and ready to go into this next 10 years, this next decade, even despite the drought contingency plan, in a position of strength from a relocation of businesses, from a relocation of tech, and a relocation of homes to the area, because we still have so much that we can utilize. Now, I'm not saying that we would ever use that, foolishly, but it also is something that's really interesting that, while a lot of people complain about our particular water company, I will give them major props in this area. And that is that, did you know that we are probably the only city in the entire state that has probably one of the most green effects when it comes to water? And what I mean by that is every home, with the exception of the oldest homes in the area, right, which is probably 40 or 50 out of that 20,000, but every home and business in Maricopa has a purple pipe attached to it, which means that every time you flush the toilet, every time you take a shower, every time you use the dishwasher, it goes into the purple pipe, it gets sent to a recycling facility. That recycling facility now uses that to water the lawns It goes into, down into the washes, which helps percolate back into the groundwater. They do recharges, which are, you legally clean it, and it goes back through the system, and then it starts to percolate back into the ground through recharge wells. And so, therefore, your water allotment goes further because you are getting a half an acre gallon back for every gallon of effluent you utilize. Wow. And so what that means then is it means that your water can go and extend so much further. And so again, while some folks dislike the water company, I have to give them props again to say it puts Maricopa in a position of strength into the coming decades because they are already thinking in ways that other water companies in other cities across this entire state will suddenly have to find themselves in a position where they have to make really hard decisions. Whereas they might have really low water bills now, but those water bills will be astronomical in the future because they will have to go back and start ripping stuff up in order to make sure that they have more reclaimed water, more potential and ability to have recyclables, et cetera. And so when you have to rebuild all that infrastructure, it's very, very expensive. Whereas we are trying to think ahead of the curve and say, how do we deal with what we know is coming and do it now? So yes, we all pay a little bit more now, but that minimalization of what you pay spread out over the long term will end up being a lot less than what the rest of the state has to pay because they have to go back and re-add it after the fact because they're going to have to build it in. They're going to be put between a rock and a hard place. And so many of these cities and these city councils that run their own water facilities are going to be put in a really ugly position. City of Phoenix right now, for example. If you haven't been following that, they have a position where they're having to say, we need to raise these rates. And they're raising them a lot. And people are like, oh, you can't do this to us. And they're saying, wait a second. The feds have said this is what we have to do. The feds have said this is what we have to clean it to. Yep. We have these water restrictions coming down the pipe. And if we don't do it now, we're not going to, A, have enough water, B, have the ability to deliver this water to you, and then we're going to have a bigger problem. But see, that's the problem in the political realm is that people come and are angry at the politicos for making these decisions that they're trying to protect your kids and your grandkids into the future, okay, 50 to 100 years. But if they don't make those decisions now, then we're in a lot of trouble. And I just think that at the end of the day, Maricopa is trying to position itself to where it doesn't find itself in those problems. Again, it's part of being a pioneer, but it's also part of being a visionary. It's looking to the future and saying, these problems are coming. How do we solve them?
Right. So if you're not familiar with the drought contingency plan, you can go to wemargad.org, and it's up there along with a link to the drought map. You can also listen to a podcast. We have podcasts as well. And I interviewed Representative Dunn about January 15th, 16th, somewhere in there. And he was speaking to the fact that after the drought contingency plan, the thing that was going to happen is that cities, in the end, the cities are going to have to come to grips with what they need to do. And what you were talking about with the effluent being reprocessed, that's one of the things that Representative Dunn was talking about. Cities are going to have to take a hard look at. So you're way ahead of that curve. Yep. And Representative Dunn would probably like to know more about it. In the meantime, let's take about a 5-minute break. Okay, so let's move on to you are a part of several different organizations. I'm going to read this list off because it's quite amazing. You are in Maricopa County and all of Arizona. You are part of the Arizona League of Cities and Towns, the I-11 Coalition. You are GPEC Ambassador, Pinal County Government Alliance, MAG, which is the Maricopa Association of Governments, Maricopa Economic Development Association, Maricopa Chamber of Commerce, and the Lower Santa Cruz River Alliance. So let's start with what is a GPEC ambassador and what does GPEC do, and then sort of go through those others, including your MAP program, and talk about how that integrates.
So yeah, I have a firm belief that if you want to attract people from outside of the area that you're in, then you really have to get outside of that area, right? You can't stay in your fishbowl and hope that some other fish is just going to accidentally jump in, right? You have to actually get out there and seek something out. And so I kind of believe you have to make it what you want want it to become. And so I'm a big believer, again, coming from the private sector, and you guys are, I'm speaking to the choir here, that it's all about networking, right? You have to get out there and you have to make things happen for you. And that's the way you do it in business, and it's the same way you build a city. You have to want to make things happen. And so I believe that we have to raise Maricopa's profile to be a player, so to speak, right? I mean, we don't have that luxury, even though we share the name of Maricopa County. You know, we don't have the luxury of saying, my name is Gilbert, or my name is the city of Phoenix, right? Or Scottsdale. And so as such, we have to do a bigger, better job of getting out there and raising our profile. So I believe that one of the ways you do that is you participate in everything. That can be really hard at times, especially when there's only one of you and you're supposed to be everywhere. But you really have to do everything you can to know the players, to know what's going on, and to be able to have a say and a piece of the table, so to speak, right? A seat at the table. So GPEC is the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, and we have 2 cities that are outside of the Phoenix metro area that are allowed inside there, and that is us and Casa Grande. And we did this way back when GPEC was still fairly young, yet Maricopa was born 15 years ago, and our first economic development director was the original founder of GPEC. And that person still works with us at MEDA, which is called the Maricopa Economic Development Alliance, which is kind of a mini GPEC that we run with inside the city. And so again, we're always trying to do things that are very forward-thinking as a young city that move us forward, both economically as well as just keep us as a player and have a seat at the table. GPEC has an ambassadors program, and as such, I am the chair of that ambassadors program. And so my job is to help with site selection and also bring in the private sector into GPEC to help them have a role in attracting new businesses to the area. Because at the end of the day, you guys all know people I don't know. And I know people you don't know. And it's the same principle when you take that on a much bigger scale. And so if you take the Phoenix metro area with folks like, I don't know, the owner of the Suns or the owner of the Diamondbacks, and you bring them to the table, and you bring the educational components to the table, like, sorry, I just forgot his name, ASU president.
Michael Crow.
Michael Crow and others. Once you start bringing all these folks to the table, now you have a great place from which to build policy from and to sell this area to other businesses around the country that are looking to relocate and to move their headquarters here. And so those are some of the things that we work on doing that. From a legislative side, I participate in the Arizona League of Cities and Towns, and I happen to be the president of the Arizona League of Cities and Towns right now. That's something pretty amazing for us as a city because, again, we had never been on the executive committee, and so I was able to work us onto the executive committee and then into an officer position and then ultimately take the presidency, which I think helps raise Maricopa's profile when you are representing all 91 cities and towns at the state legislature, and then also meeting with the governor and the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate and spending a lot of time down there to help influence state legislation so that it doesn't hurt your cities and towns. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of bills that hurt cities and towns, and you know, I don't really understand that because it's, you know, left hand hurting what the right hand is doing, and that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me because, you know, at the end of the day, it's not like we have a big coffer of money in the back with a big vault. It's, you know, in one door and out the other to police and fire and streets and infrastructure and all the things that you demand to have in the way of services. And so every time that those numbers go down from the state, then your services have to go down. It's just the way it works. So, yeah.
Great. So as we move through here, how about we look at your City Hall 24/7 program? Tell us what that is.
Well, I think City Hall 24/7 is really, it's intended to be the best of both worlds. So one of the things we did several years ago in the city of Maricopa was we tried to save money and really help increase the value of working for the city by creating a 4-day work week. And so all of our employees work 4/10s, unless you're public safety, right? Public safety is going to work around the clock, and they have different shifts and things like that. But for the most part, we have a time in which City Hall is closed on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which, you know, our employees absolutely adore, right? Because it gives them a 3-day weekend all the time. And then you have something like President's Day, they got a 4-day weekend, and all of them dart out of town, and it's great. They love it. I get to work the entire time, but that's how it works. that it's really added a sense of value. But at the same time, we understand that things need to still get done on Fridays, right? So we have things like inspectors that are available and those types of things. But for the most part, we've tried to move a lot of stuff online. We have a completely online permitting process. So you can be sitting in your PJs on a Sunday night, and instead of having to come down to City Hall on Monday morning, you can have all of your stuff uploaded. It's all digitally there. It's completely tracked on, when stuff was submitted, who looked at it last. Everything is time-stamped and dated. So it eliminates that, well, he said or she said, right? Or it becomes that argument between staff and the developer. Well, I gave you this and no, you didn't, and it sat on somebody's desk. That's all gone, okay? And it really helps increase the speed to market. We saw that at one point there was a 124-day time frame by which some things were submitted to permitting happening. That has been reduced to 4 days.
Wow.
That's a huge, huge difference. And that means it's speed to market. That means money in people's pockets. And those are the types of things we're trying to encourage. From a small business perspective, we also have moved our business licensure program. We've eliminated it. And what we have created is a business registry. You might say, well, gee, Christian, that's the same thing. No, it's not. And let me tell you why. What we're trying to do is it's all voluntary. And while you still have to have licenses or a permit to operate in some fashions if you're a specialty type business, right? You're a tobacco business or an adult business or things like that, right? Those require additional inspections as per state law. But everything else we've tried to minimize, and so we reduced the fee that was $50. Okay, it's not incomprehensible for someone to spend $50 on their business, but we saw it as a barrier to entry into the market. And so what we really wanted to create was a way for you all as business owners. I'm a business owner. How do you make this easier? And so we created this business registry. And in the business registry, it's now a one-page online application that you can print out at any time, no matter if City Hall is open or not, because that was a big problem for us, right? You had to have, so let's say we were hosting our annual Salsa Festival, which happens in March, okay? Big event for the city. Fun times. But if you're a vendor and you have forgotten to get your business license, okay, you've paid your fee, you're ready to go, and you forgot to get your business license, well, now it's Friday morning. Saturday's the event. Well, you can't get your business license, which means you can't go to the event on Saturday. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, now does it? So what we did is we revamped it and said business registry, $10, online, one page, print it out, you're good to go, you can do it in 10 minutes. That seems more helpful, right? And now your name is added to a list that's fully transparent, easily searchable, online. Everyone can see who it is. You can see your competition. You can see what spaces are not yet filled in the respect of if you're looking for a niche business. You have basically a marketing ability that you're now being broadcast to everybody because your information is there as to your registered business. And so again, while it's voluntary, we want people to come out of the shadows and sign up in droves, and yet we'll go back and market to the ones that were already through the business license program. But we just think that it's a valuable state of affairs when businesses can get into the marketplace easier, more simply, and just do their business, because that's what they're about.
So one of the things that I really liked about that was it is really hard in a city that is growing as fast as your city is to know what's new, what is there anymore. And since we don't have telephone books or city directories like city directories were 100 years ago, telephone books came in when everyone got a telephone, and you could flip through the pages and figure out who was new in town. Right. So one of the things that we've been trying to encourage cities to do is to exactly that, make that public-facing website. You know who has a business license. Let us see it so we can go through there, find a company, and search it. And I love the fact that I can search it by the type of company. I can search it by the name. It's really easy. So when you have people that you're bringing into Maricopa to look around, this is something that other cities don't have, and now I have a model. I can go back to there and say, see, they're doing it already. It is so great for clients and for people who live here already to be able to find out what's going on. So I really appreciate that. I think it's a great thing to have.
My pleasure.
Thank you. So you have, because of all the fees and the revamps that you've been doing, you are getting that business coming in. So somehow you're getting the word out.
Right.
How are you getting that word out?
So one of the things we decided to do several years ago was that, when I ran for mayor in 2012, 2011, you start the campaign and you start looking at all the pros and cons. I went and sat down with a gal that I thought should be my campaign manager. And I said, hey, I'm interested in doing this. Would you be interested in helping me run my campaign? And she says, well, why do I want to help you run a campaign for mayor when everyone I know wants to leave Maricopa? Oh, that is the worst philosophy ever, right? Okay, yes, people want to leave. It's the recession, I get it. But how do we change that perspective, right? Well, I ended up winning. And in that process, started to try and change the culture inside City Hall, because I figure you need to start there. If you can change the culture there into something positive, then it can emanate out from there, right? Because that's what you have to do. You have to set a model or a standard by which everyone else subscribes to it and tries to uphold. And so as such, as I got involved with GPEC and in the ambassadors program, I realized, why aren't we doing this here? Why aren't we modeling and taking the wheel that's already been invented? Why aren't we doing the same thing? And so what we created here, and I launched in 2013, I think, 2012, 2013, we launched what was called the Maricopa Advocate Program, or the MAP program. And the idea behind the MAP program is to create an army of volunteers that are out there spreading the good word or the message about the city of Maricopa and what we're working on. We're not perfect. We have our faults and our problems and our challenges, but one of the things we do have is we got a lot going for us. And we, again, I told you at the beginning of this presentation, is that we don't subscribe to the theory of that's the way it's always been done, we have to do it that way. No, that's the way it's always been done. Let's throw that out and start over again, right? I mean, we believe in trying to figure out the best way to do it. And so as I looked at the MAP program, the idea was, wait a second, if we can bring these folks in, they will solve a problem that I cannot do. And that is how many garage door conversations take place that I cannot be present for to set the record straight, right? So I pull in, I come home, I have my garage door up, I walk outside to get the mail, and my neighbor comes over and says, you know what I heard? I heard, right? And it's usually the city sucks, or something bad, or, they're doing this, or I can't believe this, And it's like, oh my gosh, how do you stop this, right? Well, I figured, what if we brought those folks in, from a volunteer program, and we taught them specifically straight from economic development, because there's a lot of interest in Maricopa about economic development. What's coming next? What's going on? I mean, I don't know if you know this, but if you are a surveyor in Maricopa, watch out, because your job is going to take 4 times as long as you think, right? And it's funny, because we've had folks standing on the side of the road surveying for a given project, and suddenly their boss is calling them saying, I can't believe you've wasted all this time. They're like, boss, I have been at this job site for 4 hours. And they're like, well, it should only take 30 minutes. I know, but people keep pulling over and asking me what I'm doing for what's coming here. And so I can't get my job done. And it's hilarious. And so it's just, people are very interested. So why not satisfy the curiosity by bringing them right to the source? So if we can bring them in and we can teach them right from the government officials, right from the city manager, right from economic development, and tell them what is really transpiring, what can you do, what can't you do? Because there's this philosophy that, why doesn't the city of Maricopa bring and build this? Maricopa doesn't build anything like that. I'm not in the hospital business. I'm not in the telemarketing business. I'm not in the industrial business. That's not what the government does, right? The government can entice, the government can attract, and the government can sell. But the government cannot build it for you and run it, okay? That's that bridge too far. That's crossing the line. And so my job is to go out there and sell it. But until I can get people to understand this and give the message out there, it's a lot more powerful when I'm online talking about it and saying this is how it works. But when I have 15 other people that are actually doing that for me, not because I've asked them to, but because they know the information, they know how it works, they've seen it, they've participated in it, they get it. Now you have an army of people solving that garage door problem that I cannot do, because I cannot be in thousands of garage door conversations every day. But if I have hundreds of people out there saying, well, that's actually not true. I'm a representative at MAP. I know for a fact this is how it works. This is what they're working on. This is where they're trying to go. Here are the actual problems they're overcoming. And most reasonable people then go, oh, I get it. I didn't understand that before, right? I didn't know that. And it's like, okay, now you've solved the problem, right? So instead of an uproar of anger, you have a quelling of understanding and education. And it also spurs them to say, well, how can I learn that? How can I participate? And that's why the MAP program has become so successful. I think we have 150 MAPs so far. Most of them have reached the top tier levels. There's a ranking that, as you attend certain things, then you get different levels and points and such. So anyways, it's turned out to be an amazing thing. And, over the years, it takes a lot of cultivation. It takes a lot of upkeep. And people will come and go. But for the most part, what we have found is that it has created a sense of pride in the community. It creates a sense of they want to come because they're some of the first ones to know, right, what's going on. It helps satisfy that curiosity, and it helps them share. Because one of the things that's most powerful is creating that word of mouth, right? When you go see a good movie, or you experienced a wonderful restaurant, or you had a great experience doing something fun, what's the first thing you do? Most people tell their friends. Nowadays, they whip out their phone and they go all to town on social media, right? Well, that social media is also a huge hindrance when it's full of negativity. And it's great to help quell that negativity by others, not just me. Because now there is a veracity in knowledge that is going after those who are being very negative. And I don't mean in a negative way, I mean in a completely positive way, but done so in which they're able to say, well, that's actually not true. This is what they're working on. This is how it's being accomplished. And I'll tell you, from a real estate perspective, you guys fit that bill more than anybody. I can't tell you how many MAP folks we have from the real estate agencies, or realtors, I'm sorry, because at the end of the day, that's what you do, right? You share information about a given city. And the more you know, the more up to date you are on this stuff, the more powerful you are in your own profession, which helps bring you success. And I think that that's one of the things that moves Maricopa forward fastest, is when we have a positive word of mouth, when we have people out there talking, not just because I'm telling you to talk positively about it, but because you actually learned it for yourself, right? The information was presented, you were there present, you can make your own decisions, but at least you know. And now once you know, you can convey that message. And that's what people that are your clients want to know. They want to know about the schools. They want to know about the upcomings. They want to know that their house is going to be of value in the future, right? And that's one, I think, the biggest things is that I can't wait to see people that fled during the recession and said, oh, I couldn't wait to get out of there, and now see that their house is worth 1,000 times more than they paid for it then because they decided to stick it out. Those are the ones that I look forward to say, see? This is what it means, because this is an opportunistic play. And this opportunity is going to keep compounding upon itself. And what do you know about supply and demand? Supply and demand says that the more that it keeps wanting to be, demanded, and the supply is less than what the demand is there, then the value goes up. And that's what we're looking to create.
Right. So you mentioned as part of that description that there were things, events that these members go to. Are they private to just those people, like information sessions or work groups, or is it going to like a city council or P&Z meeting?
It's a little bit of everything. So while they're public, they're open to the public, but yet they are privileged in the fact that MAPs are the ones who tend to show up, right? They're the ones that tend to go, and because of that, the information that's disclosed is public information, but it's having that direct line, right? I mean, I have my question, there's the economic development director. I have my question, there's the city manager. They have a question, there's the mayor or city council members, right? I mean, it's directly getting the information from the source. And while we don't know everything and stuff changes outside of our control, what we do have and we do know is that as we know it, you now know it. And then from there, yes, there are private events. There are things in which, only certified MAP members get to go to because they've reached certain ranks. So there are some privileges to it. There are other things in which we're always trying to hold economic development seminars of sorts, in which, again, they're the first ones to get invites to. So, again, it's a matter of some privilege, but at the same time, we want as many people that want to come.
Well, that's an amazing ambassador program.
Thank you.
It's very good. I like that. So let's switch conversations over to you are part of the I-11 Coalition.
Yes.
So let's talk about those roadways and transport corridors, and particularly I-11. What does that mean to you as a city and to you as a region in Pinal, Maricopa? You're right there on that Pinal, Maricopa.
You got it. I-11 to me means everything. Have you ever looked at Chandler and wondered why it grew to be the way it grew? It's because it has I-10, the 60, the 101, right? Now the South 202. Do you think that infrastructure helped grow their economic base at all? Of course. In fact, I'm a huge advocate of transportation. And it's funny because when I came to office, I always thought we had a vice mayor who was big into transportation. I'm like, oh, good, you take that. That's the boring stuff, you know. I don't want to deal with transportation. And then I got into it and I realized, oh my gosh, amazing transportation is the missing link to incredible economic development. If you want to see growth, if you want to see, all things, that rising tide raises all ship, if you want to see that happen, you have to have phenomenal transportation corridors. You have to. And so when you talk about I-11 for City of Maricopa, while it is not slated, the defined roadway is not slated yet. It's in the Tier 1 EIS, which is called the Environmental Impact Study right now. And then it has to move to a Tier 2 EIS. But as it narrows down and it defines this, as it's slated, if it follows a previous study done by MAG called the Hassayampa Freeway Study, if it is defined and goes through that corridor, it will come right through Maricopa's planning area. That will change Maricopa's outlook forever, okay? Because you will now have a high-speed corridor, much like the I-10, coming right through. And this connects to Mexico, right? So if this connects to Mexico and then goes on up, I was at an ADOT meeting the other day, and the Port Authority there at the Port of Mariposa, they had their general president there, and he said right now there are somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $12 billion that come up through that Port of Mariposa, up the I-10 and on up into the western United States. All of it comes through Arizona because that's the key, right? Imagine that you had a high-speed corridor, a freeway like the I-11, that didn't have to go through downtown Phoenix. Now, it can still go to Phoenix if it wants to. It comes off the 10. But if it has this additional ability, we anticipate that because of that particular freeway, that more of Mexico's traffic would shift from Texas back to Arizona, and we anticipate that it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 to $60 billion worth of trade coming through here. Now, I don't know about you, but what do you think $50 to $60 billion in additional trade coming up that roadway would do for the state of Arizona? Mm-hmm. It will explode the economy, okay, explode it. So imagine the workforce that comes here. Imagine, the other jobs, the ancillary businesses, the homes, all the other things that come along with it. It means everything to the city of Maricopa, and frankly, I think it means everything to the state of Arizona. It's a big deal. And so if we want to see great economic development come, we have to focus on roadways. And I believe that the politicians of the state do not value that as much as they should, because it's not sexy. It's not in the top priority because people don't understand it. It's why I spend so much time explaining it to people, because I believe that the more transportation abilities you have, the better you're able to move your goods and services and move your people. Let me give you a little example. I was at a MAG meeting. There was a MAG EDC, which is called Economic Development Committee. And I was sitting there next to the former mayor of Gilbert named John Lewis. And John Lewis was sitting there at a grand opening of a 600,000 square foot office building complex. And they're getting ready to cut the ribbon. And the owner is sitting right next to him on a little podium just like this. And the owner reaches over and nudges the mayor and says, "Psst, Mayor." And he says, "What?" He says, "You see that right there?" And he points to the building he just built, right? And he says, "Yeah." He says, "You know why that's here?" And he says, "Well, yeah, because you're going to create all these jobs and you have all these businesses that are going to move in and it's great for business." And he goes, "Well, yeah, that's true." He goes, "But that's not why." He says, "Well, why is it here?" And he pointed across the street to where the South 202 was running through. He says, "That's here because that's there. Period. End of story." That's what it does. It spurs economic development in droves that you cannot do any other way, because people want to be able to move their goods and services, and they want to be able to commute to their job in a timely fashion, right? And if they have to spend a lot of time doing it, they don't want to. They'll move, right? And so these are the things that people don't understand. And I believe that the more we're able to put into good transportation or great transportation in the state, the more we will see the entire economy raise. And so when you talk about things like a rail corridor, rail spurs, that's something that we in the city are working on. We're trying to work collectively with the Ak-Chin in trying to find a way that together we can work with Union Pacific to generate a business park or a tech corridor park that deals with rail spurs. And all the industry that come from that. But again, working with the railroad is not easy, but partnerships are the key. That anytime you can establish a partnership to make things go faster or more successful, just add ammunition, to the big guns, so to speak. That helps you drive your cause. But I think that the I-11 is something that this state has to get behind, and I know we're entering a modern era. And I know that, in my State of the City speech this past year, I talked about the modern technologies that are around us. Between Lucid here in Casa Grande, you have Nikola Motors in Coolidge, you have Waymo in Chandler. Okay, the reality is autonomous vehicles are going to change a lot of things, but they're also going to create a lot of jobs. And yet, at the same time, Volvo has a prototype flying car that just went on sale in September. So the era upon us is changing quickly, but yet transportation in general will always be needed. And how we get there and how we move those goods and services are going to define how we grow as a state.
So along with that, and if you are not familiar with the I-11 corridor, you can go to wemargad.org. ADOT was just at WeMAR's Government Affairs meeting in January. We had a half-hour update. Part of that update was the I-11 corridor, along with the Highway 30 and 202 and several others. They will be coming, we're trying to get ADOT to come down here to Pinal as well to give us an update on all their projects out here because it is so critical. Yep. But at least the I-11 you can know about. If you go to wemargad.org, you can see the video of the presentation. And also if you go to transportation, there's a map of the proposed I-11 corridor. So you can see where that goes. Eventually, it's proposed to go all the way up to Canada. So think about what that means if you're going from Mexico to Canada. Think what it means about Pacific Rim coming in from California. I mean, it just puts us in an amazing position to become this real economic hub for the entire country.
And it's interesting to say that because the way I-11 was created was that when they started to look at the maps, it was really interesting because do you know that the only two major metropolitan areas, Las Vegas and Phoenix, are the only ones in the entire western United States that are not connected directly by a freeway? They're the only ones. Everything else has some major freeway attaching to it. And yet you have two major destination hubs, and they're not connected. You had to take that little road, you'd go up there, you go down over the dam. It'd take you 50 million hours because it's closed, I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is then a huge ability for us to be drawing back and forth this economy, and yet we've capped it because we had no ability to move those goods and services, right? At least a limited version. And so this is what I'm talking about. Congress recognized it, and that's why they designated it. But it comes down to now funding. Where do you fund this? This stuff is not cheap. It is so expensive. But yet you have to look at the outward value. I don't think anybody in this country would doubt that this country is built because of the freeway system that came out of the 1950s, right? The 1950s and 60s. Congress realized, oh crud, we got to be able to move our missiles around the entire United States, right? Okay, well, look at the system they built. Here we had this massive infrastructure program. People got to work, coming back from the war, and now you have the ability to expand because you have a rising middle class. Everyone now has cars. They're moving to and from, and they're able to say, I don't need to stay in Brooklyn anymore. Maybe I wanted to move to Montana. Jump on the 66, right, and come over and go up. However they want to do it, but the point is they could move around in a way they never could before. And while again, air movement is wonderful, we have great deals on Southwest all the time to get to Las Vegas. But imagine what happens when you make it faster, okay? And that's the reality of it. Right.
So we have a few more minutes. Let me ask you real quick you talked about a little bit about, you alluded to healthcare and hospitals. What other types of healthcare infrastructure do you have, and are you trying to bring in to complement what you have?
Absolutely. In fact, that's something that is, you have to remember that hospitals are not an easy play anymore, okay? Not that they ever were, but you used to have government subsidies that focused on rural hospitals, okay? And so I have people all the time, we have 50,000 people here in Maricopa. We have 52 now, okay, 52,000. And I came from some small town back east and we had 2 hospitals. Yes, but those were built when you had massive government subsidies sponsoring the rural side of things. Now health has become a political issue, right? Remember Obamacare fight that just happened a little bit ago, right? for good or for bad, the reality is a hospital doesn't want to expand when they know their bottom line might be on the chopping block because politics is about to take it over, okay? And so they're very hesitant to expand. You also are dealing in a post-recessionary world. And so post-recession, people are more apt to conserve those dollars than they are to sway it. Had a presentation by Banner Healthcare the other day that talked about they have a 4% profit margin. Now, their 4% is billions of dollars, but think about it. If they have a 2% swing, they're now making half of that. If they have a 4% swing, they're at zero. Now, how long can a company go making zero profits before they file for bankruptcy? Okay, and if this is one of the major players, Banner, Dignity, Honor Health, all the other ones back east, it's shrinking as a market, right? I mean, Casa Grande's hospital was recently acquired by Banner. Okay, Tucson Medical Center was recently acquired by Banner. Okay, the smaller hospitals are being gobbled up in the need to survive because of the rising costs and expenses of all the equipment, all the doctors, all the labor, all the stuff, okay, all of the federal, all the lawsuits, all the tort reform, those types of things. All of that is making it more expensive to have a hospital. So when they place a hospital, they're going to put, even in a 20-bed hospital, you're looking at a $150 million investment. I'm sorry, but places are not going to drop $150 million lightly, okay? And that's just to start. That's not even including the costs you're going to pay for all your doctors and then hope that you're going to recoup that based on the people using it, right? So we have been working very diligently with all of those different providers to get them to understand the value that Maricopa is in its surrounding area. And yet at the same time, we're also trying to get them to think bigger. Is we don't want just a hospital, we want a hospital campus. We want them to understand the value. If they were to buy, so for example, there's a given company in Maricopa that owns a piece of property right near the entrance to the city, okay? Yet that land is so valuable. If they were to sell that and buy a different piece of land, they could buy a piece that was 3 times as large, have room for expansion, place the hospital there, and sell off the surrounding areas to all the ancillary businesses that love to congregate around a hospital. That would not only help self-fund the site, it would more than pay off for stuff and therefore make their profitability increase that much faster because they're not having to wait to pay off their initial investment. They're paying it off based on what they're selling from around them. Does that make sense? And so they're also now positioned for expansion as the city continues to grow. And so these are the things that we're trying to convey to the private sector so that while it's their job to do their due diligence and make their decisions, we're trying to help encourage them from an economic perspective to say, let us help show you the future so that you don't have to spend twice as much money by doing something, building it too small, find out that it's overutilized, and now you got to start all over again and do something different or sell that. I mean, I don't know how you sell a hospital and then start a new one. I don't know how you repurpose it, make it a big giant bowling alley or something. I don't know. But I mean, it doesn't work. And so if you can get them to think larger, but actually smarter, then we think that that's of value. And what we also are seeing in Maricopa is that, we're starting to see the congregation of health-related industries. You're starting to see med spas. You're starting to see cardiologists, foot doctors, podiatrists, all these other folks coming out here because now they're starting to have locations to either locate or they're building. But if we can create that medical campus, then it really solves a lot of problems all at once. So that's what we're working towards, but ultimately it's up to the private sector to pull that trigger.
Sounds great. Your financial advisor side is coming out.
Can't help it.
So before we end this, I wanted to give you an opportunity to let realtors know when they have clients, commercial or residential, who are looking to locate into Maricopa or to expand, where would you like them on, particularly on your website, because there's a lot of information on your website, where would you like them to direct their clients so they get the most information the quickest?
That's a good question. Gosh, I was trying to think. We're currently under a revamp in our website, and so it'll be a lot more intuitive, and we are trying to combine a few things from the standpoint of our MEDA website, which is the Maricopa Economic Development Alliance. I'm actually going to defer that question a little bit to get it from Denise, because I think that at the end of the day, while we have it up there, you can quickly you can see where the resources and utilities are. There's a calendar on there, those types of things. I think that there's also a separate website that Denise has that is a more realtor-focused type website.
Okay.
I would also say that if you don't know this, one of the things that Maricopa does is we do realtor tours. And so we love to have you all in. We feed you lunch. We put you on a big bus and we drive you around Maricopa and we kind of narrate the whole thing so that you understand what is going on. Denise is there. Other members of the planning committee are there so that you see firsthand, are able to ask questions. And I think we do it 2 or 3 times a year so that we can show you firsthand. So again, you now have that knowledge, much like our Maricopa advocates do, to go out and convey to your clients.
Great. Well, I'll be contacting you because I'll put those dates up on our website
Perfect.
and advertise it on our podcast so we
Wonderful.
make sure our members know when that is.
Awesome.
I want to thank you so much for
No,
coming.
my
It's been
pleasure.
wonderful and interesting. Please
Pleasure.
thank Mayor Price.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all for coming as well.